Good morning. This is 7th grade social studies and I'm Miss Vandenbosch. So let's learn some geography today. Our standard that we're going to focus on is 7.3, which is describing how urban areas interact and influence the surrounding regions. But before we do that, let's play our Where in the World segment. And the object of this is to guess the correct location in as few clues as possible. So this mystery location was suggested to me by Mrs. Melanie Kreiner, a teacher at Clark Shaw Magnet School. So clue number one says that this contains a strategic international waterway. So can you think of a place in the world that has a waterway that many people would like to have access to? Clue number two. This has been the center of two different empires. Clue number three, it's a transcontinental city, meaning it's on two different continents. And I think some of you are guessing it. And then clue number four, it was once called Constantinople. And did you guess? Okay, the answer is Istanbul, Turkey. So it used to be called Constantinople when it was part of the Byzantine Empire, back when it was basically the remnants of the Roman Empire after Rome fell. And then when the Ottoman Turks took over, the Ottoman Empire renamed it Istanbul in 1453. But its location where it is, right there between Europe and Asia, has made it a very important cultural bridge and an important center of trade. And that strategic waterway that we talked about is called the Bosphorus. It basically connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. So, as you may have guessed, we're going to be talking about this region, North Africa and Southwest Asia. And our essential question that we want to answer is, what role do urban areas play in this region? And when you think about this area, you may not think about urban areas at first, but we're going to talk about those a lot today. So let's travel to Southwest Asia and North Africa, about 6,000 miles away, and let's first look at a political map. So our political map of North Africa and Southwest Asia starts with North Africa. Remember last week we looked at Sub-Saharan Africa, and so this week we're taking those 5 northern countries and we're going to add those to this area over here known as Southwest Asia, or also known as the Middle East. Let's look at North Africa first. On the west, we've got Morocco on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in the Atlantic Ocean. Next to that, we have Algeria. The smaller country next to that is Tunisia. Next to that is Libya. And then finally, Egypt. Okay, so those are our 5 North African countries. Now let's move and go to the Southwest Asia region. And first, we'll start with the one at the top is Turkey, and then you can really see Istanbul right there on the Black Sea. Part of Istanbul is in the European side and part is on the Asian side. Below Turkey, we have Syria. Beneath that, in the orange is Jordan. In the pink on the map is Iraq. Next to that, in the purple, Iran, Afghanistan, and then this large country is Saudi Arabia. Next to that, on the Persian Gulf, is United Arab Emirates, UAE, and then beneath that is Yemen and Oman. And I've skipped a few of them because I want us to zoom in so that we can see them a little bit better. So let's go to the Mediterranean area. This is on the east part of the Mediterranean. And then there's a country named Cyprus, which is an island country. On the coast, we have Lebanon. Beneath that is Israel. And then we have West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which are 2 Palestinian territories. And now moving to the Persian Gulf region, we have the small country of Kuwait. On the Persian Gulf, we have the smaller country of Bahrain. And then finally, the country of Qatar, or Qatar. So let's pause for some viewer questions. One of your questions I know that you're thinking of is, I thought that area was called the Middle East. Well, you're not wrong, okay? You'll hear it called that. Your textbook calls it Southwest Asia. The term Middle East really comes from a perspective of if you're from Britain and you thought of China as the Far East, then the Middle East would be halfway there. But it's not an exact designation, so we're going to go with the the one that your textbook uses as Southwest Asia. It's important for you to know both of those, however. Another question you might be asking is, well, why are you clumping North Africa with this part of the Middle East, of this Southwest Asia? Those are two different continents. And it's a good question. You'll remember last week we looked at sub-Saharan Africa, just those countries that were south of the Sahara Desert. Well, what we do here is we think of North Africa as part of a cultural region with these other countries in Southwest Asia. They have a really strong cultural connection. And remember, culture involves religion, language, daily way of life. In this case, they have that unifying force of being predominantly Muslim. Most of the people that live in this region adhere to the religion of Islam, with one exception, of course. One notable exception is the country of Israel, which predominantly is Jewish. So let's look at a physical map of this region. First of all, we want to look at some strategic waterways. We have the Mediterranean Sea, which is in the north of Africa. Then we also have the Red Sea that separates Africa from Southwest Asia. The Persian Gulf. And then the Arabian Sea, which leads out into the Indian Ocean. We also have a very important Nile River. And then two rivers that are important to the country of Iraq, the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Also, I want to draw your attention to the Strait of Gibraltar. This is about a 9-mile wide stretch. It's very narrow. That basically is the inlet from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean Sea. It is the closest point that Africa comes to Europe. We also have the Suez Canal, which is a man-made waterway that basically creates a shortcut of sorts from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. This is through the country of Egypt, and the actual area there is the Sinai Peninsula. And so if you can imagine, this is a great shortcut for ships and vessels that would otherwise have to go around the entire continent of Africa. We also have the Bosphorus, which is a strait on Istanbul, which connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And then finally, the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth. It's about 1,400 feet below sea level, and it's one of the saltiest bodies of water. So if you tried to swim in the Dead Sea, you'd just end up floating. We also want to look at a couple of other things physically. The Sinai Peninsula, as I mentioned, that's where the Suez Canal is been created. And then also the large Arabian Peninsula. This contains the countries of Saudi Arabia and others. And then finally, you can't talk about this area without mentioning the Sahara Desert and the Arabian deserts. But also, when you think of a desert, you might think of a flat place. Well, let's look at our elevation. You can see that based on the colors of our elevation, these are nowhere near flat deserts. And in fact, this area has quite a bit of mountain ranges. So let's look at our mountain ranges. Along the Moroccan and Algerian coast, you have the Atlas Mountains. Around Turkey, you have the Taurus Mountains. In Iran, you have the Zagros Mountains. And then the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan, which are beautiful. Well, let's take a look at population density. We looked at this last week for the whole continent of Africa, and now we want to just focus on the northern part. Again, population density maps show where people live in large concentrations. So where you see the red, that's where people live. And so let's look at what our patterns that we're seeing here. You should notice that there's a lot of red right along the Moroccan and Algerian coast on the Mediterranean Sea. You also should probably notice this little squiggle here, and you can guess that that's probably the Nile River. You've got a lot of population along the Mediterranean, the east coast side there with Lebanon and Israel. And then you can see where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers of Iraq come through and empty out into the Persian Gulf. So let's contrast that with this view. This is Egypt at night. And so what we're seeing here is a satellite view. And of course, at night, lights light up. And so if you think about an urban area, a city area that has lights that don't turn off at night, parking lots, street lights, factory lights and things, you would expect to be able to see lights where the cities are. So this is actually all of the urban areas that are built up around the Nile River and its delta. And think about how this compares to what you just saw on the population density map. And you can really get a sense as to how vital this Nile River region is to Egypt. Most of the people in Egypt live right along the banks of the Nile River. In fact, over about 90% of the people of Egypt live in close proximity to the Nile. So I posed this question to my students. What comes to mind when you think of North Africa and Southwest Asia? And I wanted to get some images on what they thought. So this is what some of my students responded this week. 32% of them said they think of vast deserts. 29% said small villages. 23% thought about ancient civilizations. Only 7% thought of modern cities or towering skyscrapers, 6%. And then 3% thought of the nomadic people that live in this region. Well, the short answer is all of this is found in the Middle East and North Africa. And we're going to take a look at this, but we're going to focus on some of those urban areas that might not come to mind. So let's do our visual vocabulary. An urban area refers to a city and its suburbs. You can think of it as the opposite of rural. You tend to have a higher population density. This is areas where people are living in closer proximity to one another. An example of that is Beirut, Lebanon, shown here. And of course, the opposite of urban would be rural. I'm sorry, I went too far. This is where you would see settlements in the country, the opposite of urban. You would typically have your traditional economies in a rural area, such as farming. Low population density, and an example of that would be Afghanistan, shown here. So a word that I need you to know is urbanization. Urbanization is the movement of people from rural areas to those urban areas. And a lot of times it's been the result of push-pull factors. A push factor may be something that makes you leave your rural area, maybe lack of a job. And then a pull factor is something that's pulling you toward that urban area. And the opposite of not having a job would be to find a job. So those push-pull factors, many seek urban areas because of better economic opportunities. And the rate of urbanization worldwide is increasing. So we're expecting to see that drastically go up. In this area particularly, though, physical geography has contributed to urbanization. Think about the arid conditions, the very dry land, the deserts, the remoteness of some of the territory. You would probably want to cluster where you have water resources, cluster together for lots of different economic reasons. So we're going to see this in the Middle East and North Africa. Now there are still those, like the Tuaregs, who do the camel caravans across the North African desert. You also see Bedouins who do the herding of sheep and goats and camels. But for the most part, this area is a very, very urbanized region that most people don't think about. Here's the famed Blue City of Morocco. This region actually has the second highest urbanization rate in the world, believe it or not. Here's a picture of Tripoli, Libya. One of those pull factors, of course, is the water resources. Here's a picture of Cairo, Egypt. Over 90% of the people of Egypt live within close proximity to the banks of the Nile River for those water resources, for the fresh water. Another pull factor are economic opportunities, jobs. Here's a view of Algiers, Algeria. Many people are attracted to the shipworking jobs there. And one thing that you might not have thought about were some of these ultra-modern cities that exist in Southwest Asia. Here's Abu Dhabi. Very modern buildings, architecture, looks like a city of the future in United Arab Emirates. But of course, this region started out with two main cultural hearths, two ancient civilizations. We have the ancient civilization of the Egyptians that made their civilization along the banks of the Nile River, as well as the ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Both of these cultural hearths really had advances in farming and trade and made advances in culture, knowledge, and technology that has been passed down for generations. Many urban areas in this region grew up in proximity to trade routes. Here's a picture of Petra, Jordan. and Damascus, Syria, which is one of the oldest continually inhabited cities in the world that grew up on a trade route. Speaking of trade, the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, Turkey is world famous for its trade, being the center of public life. This is the world's oldest and largest covered bazaar. I think it has about 5,000 shops and attracts over 250,000 to 400,000 visitors a day. And even if you're not on the scale of the Grand Bazaar, a small souk in Morocco is the same type of center for daily interaction and commerce for people that live in urban areas. Cities also serve as cultural industrial centers. Here's a view of Istanbul, Turkey. That's the Hagia Sophia. That used to be a Greek Orthodox church, and then it became a mosque during the Ottomans, and then now serves as a museum. So these types of places serve as centers of religion, politics, and art. We also have some cities in the Middle East that serve as spiritual centers to world faiths. 3 of the world's monotheistic faiths had their birth in the Middle East, and that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So here's a view of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and it's a holy site to 3 of these religions. To Jewish people, they have the Western Wall, which was the part of the temple left over from the Temple of Jerusalem. Muslims look at the Dome of the Rock as a holy site, and then Christians have holy sites in the city as well, such as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And also we have destinations for holy pilgrimage. One of these, in addition to Jerusalem, is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Here's the Kaaba, which is a holy place for Muslims. In fact, it is in the direction of Mecca that Muslims pray, and once in their life they try to take a holy pilgrimage called the Hajj. Of course, the cities in the Middle East have also served as seats of government and political power for centuries. Here's a palace in Istanbul, Turkey. And even today, they serve as centers of influence in the region and the world. It's hard to turn on the news and not hear something from one of these cities. They still continue to make news because of issues with conflict and security of their nations, civil war, and such. But they continue to draw tourists. This is Beirut, Lebanon. Some people call Beirut the Paris of the East, of the Middle East. It is a place that has lots of art, fashion, cuisine. It's a great blend of modern and traditional. Here's an architectural style in Beirut. And then some of the fastest growing cities on earth are in the Persian Gulf region. This is the Burj Khalifa, which is the world's tallest building in Dubai. This area attracts visitors, investors, tourists, guest workers. It is truly a visionary type of city and rapidly growing, I might add. And one thing that I saw when I flew over Dubai were these artificial islands that are being built in the Persian Gulf, which just shows how kind of rapid expansion of urbanization that is taking place there. The largest mall in the world is in Dubai. It's got a skating rink, movie theaters, entertainment park, you name it. So how do they get all this money? Well, there are a lot of oil resources in this region that help fund some of the what you're seeing with these modern cities. The red dots on the screen show you the amount of oil production that is done, and the small gray squares show you the amount of oil fields. So you can see the amount of oil that is being pumped daily from this region. The oil industry, in particular, has fueled urbanization in the Middle East and North Africa. Half of the world's known oil reserves are here, and 20% in Saudi Arabia alone. Okay? In fact, they even have a problem with shortage of labor to work in those oil fields, and they have a large percentage of guest workers in the Persian Gulf states, people who come from other countries to work in their oil fields and construction industry. So the essential question today was, what role do urban areas play in this region? And I hope that you have been able to get a feel for just the diversity of the roles that they play. Cities have historically been centers of commerce, of markets and trade, job opportunities, cultural, religious, and education centers, and seats of government and power. And due to the physical geography of this region, they probably play an outsized role in this region as compared to other regions. And they continue to influence in areas of travel and tourism, international commerce and finance and things like that. Some of the demographic trends that we're seeing in the Middle East and North Africa, it's the second highest urbanization rate in the world. 63% of the population is below the age of 30, which means it's a young population. It's growing at a 4% urban growth rate, which is higher than the world's average. And there's a large influx of displaced people from different conflicts in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we've got some crowded urban conditions, housing shortages, high costs of housing, housing that has sprung up that is inadequate and unsafe in some ways. We've got increased job competition, higher unemployment, particularly with the youth. Okay, remember that they've got a huge youth population. And then the strain on cities, the strain on the services that cities provide, from infrastructure to sanitation to education services to health care resources, all of these types of things are limited. So I wanted to take a look at some of those unemployment figures, but you can see a range here of just what they range from. You can see that some of the Persian Gulf states, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, have a very low unemployment, and it ranges all the way up from 1.1 in Kuwait and UAE, all the way up to some very high figures. Yemen, 37%, Syria, 50%. What would account for those? Well, some of those areas have some conflict going on. Syria's in the middle of a civil war. Yemen has also had conflict with Saudi Arabia. So that might explain some of that. We also have a large unemployment rate among the youth, okay? Typically, unemployment rates for youth, 15 to 24-year-olds, tend to be higher, but you can really see some large figures here that are probably very troubling to this region. Again, this is a very urbanized area. Kuwait is about 100% urbanized, and you can see that most of the countries in this region are more than 50%. The world average is 56% urbanized, and the rate of that is 1.9. So in this region, we've got some countries that are well above the world's average and well above the average rate of growth. And I'm going to skip this. And so I want to do a review of two questions. Which of these is a common pull factor attracting people to this region? Is it increased job opportunities, increased competition for employment, a decrease in available affordable housing, or lack of adequate services and resources? All of these could be either a push or a pull factor, but we're looking for something that would pull them toward urban areas, and that would be A, increased job opportunities. And then secondly, many of the countries of Southwest Asia and North Africa are experiencing high what? Particularly with the young adult population. Would that be homelessness, school dropout rates, unemployment, malnutrition, or health problems? And you guessed it, unemployment. That has become a particular problem in North Africa and Southwest Asia. Well, I hope that you have learned something from today. Next week, we're going to be looking at South Asia, and I'm excited for that. And so we look forward to having you join us next week. Thank you for being with us.